Welcome to our video about the fascinating world of Pokemon and their placement on the Tree of Life. Today, we are taking a closer look at Beedrill and how it is evolutionarily linked to Butterfree. Ready? Let's go! Butterfree and Beedrill both belong to a class called Insects. Insects are the most species-rich class of arthropods and, with an absolute majority, also the most species-rich class of animals overall. Over 1 million insect species have already been scientifically described, with around 7,000 new species added each year. Entomologists believe that the discovered portion represents only 10 to 20% of the insects that actually exist on Earth, with 80 to 90% still undiscovered and unclassified. This means that more than half of the approximately 2.16 million described animal species are insects. Fossil insects resembling silverfish were first detected 385 million years ago in the Devonian period. The size of insects varies greatly and ranges between 1 and 20 millimeters for most species. The smallest species are parasitoid wasps that lay their eggs in other insects, with males of the smallest known species, Dicopomorpha ecmepterygis, measuring 0.14 to 0.24 millimeters in length. The smallest free-living insects are featherwing beetles, with a minimum body length of about 0.4 millimeters. The largest known insects are stick insects with a body length of about 33 centimeters and the giant longhorn beetle, Titanus giganteus, with a body length of 15 centimeters. Depending on their lifestyle, the body of insects can be elongated, flattened, or more or less spherical. All insects have an exoskeleton made of the structural protein sclerotin and the polysaccharide chitin, and a clearly visible anatomical division into 3 sections: head, thorax, and abdomen, with exactly 3 pairs of legs. All body parts consist of individual segments that have a dorsal plate, a ventral plate, and lateral plates. On the sides of the segments, there are openings of the tracheal system called spiracles, whose actual number can vary greatly among different taxa of insects. Extremities and their parts, mouthparts, styli, gonopods, can also be paired on each segment. The thorax carries 6 legs, 3 pairs. Each segment also has a pair of ganglia in the ventral nerve cord, with the ganglia of the head fused into a supraesophageal and a subesophageal ganglion. Between the segments are stretchable membranes called intersegmental membranes, allowing for the movement of the segments relative to each other and changes in body volume during egg production, feeding, or breathing. These membranes are not present in rigidly fused segments, such as the head. The exoskeleton forms the outer layer of the insect's body. This cuticle is produced by an underlying epidermis. Embedded within it are sensory organs and various gland ducts of the insect. The exoskeleton forms various surface structures, including warts, spines, hairs, bristles, scales, and tubercles, with varying degrees of involvement from the epidermis. The external layer or individual body parts of the insect can be colored by the deposition of pigments, pigment colors, or due to special light-refracting surfaces, interference colors. Sensory organs consist mainly of hair sensilla distributed across the body, which respond to vibrations and oscillations, but can also perceive smells, humidity, or temperatures. Some of these sensory cells are grouped into sensory organs, such as Johnston's organ on the pedicel of the antenna, or tympanal organs for sound perception, found, for example, in katydids. This allows for the perception of vibrations from 1 Hz to 100,000 Hz. Optical sensory organs include compound eyes and ocelli, and many larvae have larval ocelli. Insects are found in almost all habitats on Earth. A significant exception is the oceans, where no insects are found. Only about 100 species live on the sea surface. Despite several reasons making the oceans very inhospitable habitats for insects, it remains an open question for science why not a single species has adapted to life in the sea. The greatest diversity of insect species exists in tropical regions, while only a few but highly adapted insect species live in extreme habitats such as polar regions, high mountains, and sea surfaces. For example, in Antarctica, there is the midge species Belgica antarctica. On the sea surface, there are the sea skaters belonging to the true bugs, and in tidal flats, the larvae of midges from the genus Clinio can be found. Some species are very specialized and are only found in particularly suitable habitats, while others can live in almost all habitats except extreme ones and have been spread worldwide by humans, making them cosmopolitans. The latter include various species of cockroaches, ants, and termites, as well as domesticated honeybees. Most insects live in soil or on near-ground structures and on and in plants. It is estimated that about 600 insect species are associated with each tree species in the tropical rainforests, amounting to around 30 million insect species with 50,000 tree species. Many insects also live on animal species, mostly as ectoparasites like the various species of animal lice and fleas, or as commensals and predators in the fur of animals. Humans are no exception. For example, various species of human lice can be found on them. Less frequently, insects are endoparasites in animals. Notable examples include botflies from the dipteran group, whose larvae develop in the throat or nasal cavity or even in the stomach of herbivores. Due to their diversity, insects have occupied almost every ecological niche suitable for their size. Many species play a significant role in the remineralization of organic matter in soil, litter, dead wood, and other organic structures. This group includes decomposers found in animal carcasses. Many other species live as herbivores on living plant parts, ranging from root hairs to wood, leaves, and flowers. Some species live as nectar and pollen collectors, playing an essential role in plant pollination. Others live in and on fungi and feed on them. A large group of insects preys on other insects or smaller prey animals. Another group consists of insects that feed on parts of larger animals, such as hair, scales, and similar substances. This group also includes numerous parasites among insects that suck blood or develop in living tissues. A peculiarity among insects is various types of social insects. This form of living together has evolved independently multiple times in termites and social hymenopterans. Developed in various hymenopterans. In these animals, an insect society is formed in which individuals take on specific roles within the community. This often leads to the formation of castes, whose members share morphological and behavioral traits. For example, many ants have workers, soldiers, and nest caretakers. In these cases, reproduction is handled by very few reproductive individuals within the insect society, sometimes just a single queen laying fertilized and unfertilized eggs. Many insects have the ability to fly, with flying insects being the most species-rich group in the entire animal kingdom. Most species have 2 pairs of wings. The earliest widely recognized insect fossil is Rhyniognatha hursti from the Praegian stage of the Lower Devonian, about 407 million years ago. From the same formation also comes the oldest springtail, Rhyniella precursor, considered the oldest insect until it was reclassified. These relatively advanced fossils suggest an already long evolutionary history, likely extending back to the Silurian. Insects are therefore only slightly younger than the oldest finds of terrestrial animals. Since only difficult-to-interpret relics, possibly including mandibles, have survived from Rhyniognatha, statements about its appearance and classification in modern relations are speculative. The initial describers even consider a connection to winged forms possible, though this remains highly speculative. Newer investigations suggest it might actually have been a myriapod. True fossil finds of winged insects come from rocks at the Carboniferous Permian boundary, about 95 million years younger. Winged insects from a variety of orders, both living and extinct, are present here. Their wing morphology already allowed for different flight styles. The Carboniferous fauna included, for example, the Paleodictyoptera, which sometimes had small wing-like projections on the first thoracic segment. During the Carboniferous, these ancient orders made up about a third of the insect fauna. Cockroaches were numerous, but not very species-rich. Of the 27 insect orders identified from the Carboniferous, 8 became extinct at the Permian boundary or shortly thereafter. 3 more orders died out at the Triassic boundary. Since this evolutionary bottleneck, all surviving lines have more or less steadily increased in diversity. The third mass extinction at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary seems to have affected insects only slightly. Surprisingly, this increased diversity seems to be due not to faster speciation rates, but to lower extinction rates. Both radiations and longer periods with low species numbers and little evolutionary innovation can be linked to pronounced fluctuations in Earth's oxygen levels during the Paleozoic. Extended periods with very few fossil finds are therefore probably not solely due to the vagaries of fossil preservation, but may indeed be real. During periods of unusually high oxygen levels, spectacular giant insects lived with body sizes up to 10 times that of modern forms. The ancient dragonfly Meganeura moni, found in Commentry, France, had a wingspan of 63 centimeters, and Meganeuropsis permiana is said to have had a wingspan of 71 centimeters, likely close to the upper limit for flight capability in the arthropod body plan. Most modern insect orders emerged in the Permian, but the now dominant holometabolous insects played a secondary role for a long time. Only from the Triassic did they experience an explosion of species and form diversity. Reasons for this success are seen in the mass extinction at the end of the Permian. Previously dominant insects died out, in better resistance to the arid climate of the Permian and the spread of seed plants. All currently recognized insect orders and nearly two-thirds of the families are also represented in fossils, with their tertiary species numbers correlating well with their current ones. An exception to this is butterflies, which are less species-rich in fossils. Now, let's look at the order to which beadrill belongs. Hymenoptera is an order of insects. Like beetles, butterflies, and dipterans, they are one of the 4 megadiverse insect orders, with about 156,000 described species across 132 families. Hymenoptera are an ecological keystone group with crucial importance for the structure and function of nearly all terrestrial ecosystems due to their role in pollination, bees, their density and biomass in various ecosystems, ants, and their significant impact on all other insects, parasitoid wasps. Additionally, there are numerous other groups with a variety of specializations. Most eusocial insect species, which form insect societies, belong to the Hymenoptera. They are usually small to medium-sized insects, with the largest species like Pepys heros reaching about 6.5 centimeters in body length and 10 centimeters in wingspan. The smallest winged insects, with wingspans of only about 1 millimeter, also belong to the Hymenoptera. They are holometabolous insects with caterpillar or maggot-like larvae, a pupal stage, and usually winged adults. The head of the adults is usually very mobile, connected to the thorax by a slender neck region. In all Hymenoptera, the abdomen is closely attached to the thorax. The ventral plate of the first abdominal segment is always lost. In the more morphologically primitive families, grouped as Symphida, the usually cylindrical abdomen is broadly attached to the thorax. In the Apocrita, waisted wasps, the rear end gains mobility through the constriction of the second abdominal segment. Here, the first abdominal segment is fused with the thorax, and the remaining abdomen is attached by a, usually, stalk formed from the second segment, called the petiole. Female Hymenoptera are the only holometabolous insects with an ovipositor. The ovipositor's structure corresponds to that of many groups of more primitive hemimetabolous insects, such as grasshoppers, and is therefore called orthopteroid. Its components can actually be homologized with the ovipositor of primitively wingless silverfish. It is therefore not an innovation of the Hymenoptera but inherited from their ancestors, while in other holometabolous insects, it has been secondarily reduced, plesiomorphy. The ovipositor is present in almost all Hymenoptera but is often retracted into an internal sting chamber and not immediately visible in the resting position. In most sawflies, it is saw-like and used to insert eggs into plant tissue. In parasitoid wasps, it is often highly modified and usually very thin, used to lay an egg into other arthropods, where the larva then develops as a parasitoid. In the Aculeata, stinging wasps, the ovipositor has evolved into a stinger. The ovipositor is formed from the dorsal plate, tergum, of the ninth abdominal segment and various appendages that originated from limb structures. These are called gonococcytes and gonapophyses, often more neutrally referred to as valvifers and valves, or valvuli. The opening of the internal genital organs, the gonopore, lies on the ventral side between the gonococcytes. The actual ovipositor consists of 3 pairs of elongated appendages, which can be fused to varying degrees. The first and second valves form the actual ovipositor. Typically, the 2 pairs are interlocked so that they cling to each other but can slide against each other. During the stinging act, both pairs move back and forth at high speed, burrowing into the substrate, usually aided by teeth or barbs. The third pair of valves forms a sheath in which the ovipositor is encased when at rest. All the valves are innervated and have numerous sensory hairs. The ovipositor in Hymenoptera is associated with 2 glands. In the larger venom gland tubes lead into a large cavity that continues into a canal within the stinger. The secretion serves as a lubricant or glue for the eggs in sawflies. In parasitoid wasps and aculeata, it acts as a venom, primarily to paralyze hosts for egg-laying or prey. In species where the stinger and muscles allow it, it is also used for defense. The second, smaller glands are known as Dufour's glands. Their function is not fully understood in all cases. In ants, they release an alarm pheromone. Hymenoptera have mouthparts typically adapted to various degrees for licking or sucking, especially for feeding on nectar and sugary fluids. These mouthparts usually consist of the fused labium and maxillae, forming a structure known as the labiomaxillary complex. In combination with this structure, they almost always possess normal, chewing mandibles, which are rarely used directly for feeding. Instead, they are adapted for various other purposes, such as gnawing out of quarters and pupal cases and nest construction. In the labiomaxillary complex, the labium is fused to the maxillae at the base rather than attached to the head capsule. The entire structure can be extended out of the head capsule by tilting forward. In the extended state, the labium can move back and forth. The lobes of the labium, glossy and paraglossy, collectively called the ligula, usually have a hairy surface that can lick up liquids and move them to the mouth opening during movement. This feeding method is common in most Hymenoptera, both in the plant-eating Symphida and in parasitoid wasps. Most Apocrita, which hunt arthropods for their larvae, also use it for their own metabolism. In bees, which feed on nectar and pollen even as larvae, this structure is elongated into a true proboscis, capable of reaching nectar hidden in long flower tubes. In long-tongued bees, e.g., honeybees, the galea of the maxillae and the labial palps form the food canal together with the glossy. In other groups, other parts can form a functionally similar proboscis. In colorful bees, the licking movement of the glossy is completely abandoned, and the nectar is simply sucked up like through a tube. The antennae in Hymenoptera follow the characteristic basic structure of insects, with escape, pedicel, and flagellum. The structure of the antennae varies greatly and is highly characteristic for different families. The number of flagellar segments can range from 1, e.g., Argidae, to more than 50, e.g., some Ichneumonidae. Often, both the number and shape of the flagellar segments are sex-specific, with males often having one more segment than females. Sometimes, the flagellar segments are externally toothed or lamellate only in males. The antennae can be club-shaped towards the tip in both sexes or only in females. In many Hymenoptera, the escape is significantly elongated, often with the rest of the antenna attached at a distinct angle, geniculate antennae. The surface of the antennal flagellum is covered with numerous sensilla, which serve as mechanoreceptors and chemoreceptors. In females, these are primarily used to find oviposition sites, host plants or hosts, while in males, they are used to search for females, often recognized by species-specific pheromones. A typical type of sensillum is the broad, plate-like sensilla, Sensilla placidea. Male antennae often also have glands that play a role in sex recognition and mating. Hymenoptera larvae have a usually round or oval head capsule, 3 thoracic segments, and 10 abdominal segments, often secondarily ringed. On the head, there are chewing mouthparts that normally point downward or slightly backward. The strongest mouthparts are almost always the mandibles, which can be stout and toothed or long and sickle-shaped. On the sides of the head, in more primitive forms, there is a larval eye, called a stemma or ocularium, from which only a single lens is externally visible. In boring, parasitic, or nest-living species, the eye is reduced. The head has a pair of antennae, which vary in length, but are almost always quite short. In some leaf-rolling wasps, they reach about half the length of the head capsule and consist of 7 segments. In most Hymenoptera, the antennae are strongly reduced and consist of one, often barely recognizable segment. In multi-segmented antennae, the segments usually become noticeably smaller towards the tip. The thorax of Hymenoptera larvae consists of 3 very similar segments. In free-living Symphida, each segment bears a pair of short legs, which in the basic plan consist of 5 segments with a claw at the end but are often partially or completely reduced. In the abdomen, free-living plant wasp larvae have short, weakly sclerotized 1 or 2 segmented leg pairs. These are present in Zyelidae on all abdominal segments and in most leaf-rolling wasp larvae on segments 2 to 7 or 2 to 8 and the 10th, last, segment. The larval morphology of Hymenoptera varies greatly due to different lifestyles. Larvae of more morphologically primitive plant wasps are usually plant-eating, similar to caterpillars of butterflies. Other plant wasps bore into wood or plant stems, often with reduced legs and other modifications. The larvae of parasitoid wasps, and the related family Oresidae, have many reductions, especially of the extremities and sensory organs, due to their parasitic lifestyle. Typically, they are legless, apodous, maggot-like larvae, with only the head capsule being weakly sclerotized and usually white. The larvae of Aculeata have a similar body structure to those of parasitoid wasps. Most Hymenoptera larvae can secrete silk threads made of proteins from glands located in the mouthparts, labium. In most groups, the last larval stage spins a cocoon in which pupation takes place. Some plant wasps spin protective larval webs in which they live earlier on. Hymenoptera are characterized by an unusual variety of special adaptations in their lifestyle. The larval diet is particularly modified, while the adults mainly feed on sugary juices such as nectar, and in some groups, pollen, sometimes no longer taking in any food. In groups whose larvae are provisioned with insect food by the mother or lay their eggs as parasitoids and other arthropods, the adults have also often partially adopted a predatory diet. Many parasitoid wasps feed at least partially on the hemolymph of their host species, which they lay eggs in. As predators in many terrestrial habitats, ants are particularly important. An impressive example is driver ants. The social wasps, which also act as ecological predators in many habitats of Central Europe, use their prey almost exclusively to feed their larvae and, as is usual among Hymenoptera, consume only sugary liquids for themselves. Some sawflies, Tenthredinidae, also feed predaciously as adults. In the primitive groups of Hymenoptera, collectively known as plant wasps, the larvae primarily feed on plants, phytophagous. A variety of species utilize leaves of tree species or herbaceous plants. Some species mine in leaves or stems. Some groups, such as wood wasps, have transitioned to wood as a food source. They do not feed on the wood itself, but cultivate wood-decomposing fungi that form their primary food source. Possibly only once, in the common ancestor of Oresidae and Apocrita, there was a shift to feeding on other arthropods. The larvae do not hunt prey but feed on a single individual, which is initially kept alive but usually killed in the end. This parasitoid lifestyle is thus a mix between true parasites and predators. Most primitive species feed externally on their host, which is paralyzed and usually killed quickly, idiobient parasitoids. In many evolutionary lines, the larvae independently switched to developing inside the host, which remains mobile and can continue to grow, koinobient parasitoids. Thousands of species are parasitoids of other parasitoids, hyperparasitoids. Some evolutionary lines within Apocrita have later returned to a phytophagous lifestyle, such as gall wasps and some chalcid wasps. In the stinger-bearing Hymenoptera Aculeata, which evolved from parasitoid wasps, the original parasitoid lifestyle has been maintained in many groups. However, many Vespoidea and Apoidea exhibit completely altered feeding behaviors. Since Hymenoptera larvae are mostly immobile, brood care plays a particularly important role in the order. The caring part is almost always the mother, and only in very rare exceptions, both sexes. females almost always spend a lot of time and care on laying their eggs. The eggs usually need to be placed directly in a suitable food substrate, as the larvae would be hardly capable of later corrections. Wood wasps and other plant-boring species usually deposit their eggs deep in the wood. Parasitoids normally lay their eggs directly in the future host, less often and only with immobile hosts beside it. There are exceptions, e.g., trigonality. In Aculeata, the female has usually transitioned to not leaving the food animals for her offspring at the site of discovery, but transporting them to a protected nest. In many evolutionary lines, the larvae are provisioned with not just one, but many prey organisms. However, several relatives have developed into kleptoparasites that exploit the provisions collected by other species for their own offspring. In bees, and a few species from other evolutionary lines, the nest is provisioned not with arthropods, but with collected pollen. Many Hymenoptera from various evolutionary lines have transitioned to multiple animals living together and coordinating their behavior through signal exchange, i.e., developing social behaviors. In some leaf-rolling wasps, many Progidae, and some other groups, the larvae live together in large groups, with feeding behavior and often pupation being coordinated. In parasitoids, many larvae often live in the same host, gregarious parasitoids. In some cases, this even leads to some larvae no longer develop themselves but instead exclusively defend their siblings against other parasitoid larvae in the same host. These often also exhibit particular body structure characteristics, caste formation. Social insects are common among Hymenoptera. This is facilitated by haplodiploid sex determination in the order. Males develop parthenogenetically from unfertilized eggs, while females hatch from fertilized eggs. This makes the female offspring particularly closely related to each other, allowing them to increase their inclusive fitness by supporting their sisters. A long underestimated factor in the development of eusocial behavior is also the fact that living together in a nest, into which much work has already been invested, always promotes social behaviors. For the family, I chose paper wasps. Which family would you have chosen? Write it in the comments. The compound eyes are kidney-shaped. The often black and yellow aposematic coloration as a warning pattern indicates the defensiveness of most species. That's it for Beadrill. In the next episode, we will analyze the relationship between Charizard and